WCLN 1170 Radio and Star Vision Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The name of the show is We Should Know. I want to thank Nicole for introducing our show each and every week. She does a great job with that. I also want to welcome you back. If you're listening to us, you're listening to us on WCLN 1170 AM. You may be watching it on Star Vision TV. The show airs at 2:30 to 3:30 on Tuesdays. Tuesdays, Wednesday, Thursday at 7 p.m., Star Vision TV. We're also uploaded to YouTube now, and you can read a summation in the Sampson Weekly newspaper. I want to thank all those folks for comments from our last week's show. We talked about Live After 5 in downtown Clinton and the number of events we were having, and we encourage everybody to come out and be part of that event this year. 5 events in reality. We'll have a number of great bands. So remember, Live After 5, you can contact the City of Clinton, Mary Rose, talk to her for more details, or Ray Jordan at the Agri Exhibition Center for additional details. Today, we're talking to a couple of folks that sometimes you see a lot of one of them. The other one you might not see that much, but they're very much in charge of and responsible for the preparation and delegation of services here in Sampson County. Ed Causey is the county manager. And, of course, we have David Clack, who is the finance officer. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today and taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy schedule because it's budget time. And I guess I could start maybe with either one of you, but as we start this discussion, kind of remind the folks a little bit about who you are, how long you've been doing, what you're doing, how you got into that. And let me start with David, since Ed's the county manager. We'll just kind of bypass him now and give you a shot at the mic to start with, Dave.
Okay, I'm the finance officer. I've been with the county now about 19 years. Mm-hmm. Part of my functions include, of course, the day-to-day financial operations of the county, risk management, and some personnel aspects, and a lot to do with budget. Mm-hmm. So right now, as departments have turned their budgets into us, and we've talked with the board some, we're in the process of actually making cuts where we need to or making changes where we need to in the budget to have a presentation ready for the Board of Commissioners.
You're one of those people that's got left brain thinking skills that's often needed by folks like me and others that have primarily right brain thinking skills. So I'm sure your job is to make sure that the number's in the right row and everything adds up at the end of the day.
And everything's balanced.
Everything's balanced. That's an important word. You might hear that again as we talk. Ed Causey, you've been with the county for how many years now? I know we've talked to you on this show before. You're out and about in the community. You're kind of a hands-on, up-front kind of county manager, and it don't take a whole lot for you to tell folks what you think about things, and you can see that as a positive thing because folks are looking for transparency today.
That is correct. JW, I have been here since May of 2010. If I survive, I will be starting my 4th year, and hopefully we'll be doing the budget and things of that nature. As I told you before, I retired from USDA after 39 years, had been involved with Sampson County heavily, doing a lot of financing and consultation in a number of areas, and thought it was a good fit, so here I am. David may tell you that I've lasted a lot longer than he thought, but that being said, I'm still here.
Well, the interesting thing is you do have it. As I recall, we've had conversations in the past, and you've got a good background in agriculture and understand agriculture, and I think for anybody in this area, that is one of the foremost things that I would think would be important, that if you don't understand that, you're going to have problems in this part of the state, in particular in Sampson or any of the surrounding counties, to understand that. So again, thank you for being here. One of the things that we want to talk about today is this whole process of budget. And when I think about budget, and immediately I think about services. There's a kind of a tie to that. But there's also a process, and let's kind of, I guess, look at it. I'll just throw 2 kind of general questions out. But in the fiscal year we're in now, 2012, 2013, what do you see is or has been some of the key challenges you've had in dealing with this budget that you've got now? I know this budget's coming to an end in the next short period of time here, but the key challenges you've faced, because there's been a lot of issues with federal, state funding, all kinds of things. Let's talk about some of those issues that you've faced in this year's budget, and we'll talk about the planning for the coming year.
Basically, in many respects, things are similar, but at the same time, problems that you may not have addressed in the past will continue to be prevalent for you. The thing one of the biggest issues that we have is the fact that if you know up until about 6 or 7 years ago, any county's tax base was increasing probably 2 to 4% a year. So as we're moving forward in the last few years, we've not had that kind of growth that is sustained. And like everybody else, our bill for utilities and gas and things of that nature continue to increase, and we don't always have the increasing revenues to do that. Would remind everybody that we are, in many respects, an agent of state government, and therefore there's a lot of mandates that come to us from the state and federal. And as the federal and state change, sometimes the decisions that they make may pass on certain expenditures to us that we've got to be prepared to absorb. So we're in an ever-changing dynamic and have to be prepared to deal with those.
David, as you look at that and think about those questions and the challenges you've had over this past budget year, the 2012-2013 budget year, this fiscal year, what are some of the things that, when you look at just acclimatation of numbers and look at what you see each day with departmental figures, has it caused you any situations where you've had to go in and stop one thing and move something to somewhere else, or see something that's being cut on the state or federal level that immediately starts to impact you, or have you been able to weather that?
We've basically been able to weather a lot of that because when we get the state estimates, they're pretty much that's what we're going to get. If we provide the service or whatever, we'll get that much money. What we do have to do, basically, since we budget on a line item basis, we do have departments constantly reallocating funds. All of our department heads have been good budget managers, so they'll amend the budget to make the expenditure they need to make without touching certain other line items that the board wants us to leave alone, like lap salaries. You know, turnover in the county creates a situation where a position might not be filled for a month, so that's money you save. That's money we want to keep in the county or keep in the county's fund balance so we can have it to appropriate next year. And our department heads have been very good about keeping up with that. You know, I'm constantly doing budget amendments, of course, but that's basically if gas, oil, and tires or the line item might be a little bit low, putting a little money in there and moving it around, but basically within a department. So a department that's going to spend $500,000 this year is not going to spend more than that $500,000 this year, and hopefully we'll spend a little less.
Ed, when we think about county budgets, oftentimes we hear a lot. You can turn the TV on, there's always some conversation about federal expenditures and $16-17 trillion in debt and all those kinds of things. Does local governments and county and city budgets, are they required to balance every year?
We are required to come up with a balanced budget every year.
Unlike federal?
Unlike federal, yes.
So I think the other thing that comes to mind too, there seems to be more of a personal sense of relationship with local budgets versus state or federal budgets, because quite frankly, somebody in the community is being impacted if it relates to a job or having a job or not having a job. There's probably at least 10 or 20 family members that's maybe calling or going, well, you know, I hope you don't do away with that position or add whatever. Do you find that is to be true?
Yes, without question. A lot of times when we sit back and think about county government, we really don't think about how we're impacted in the services. For example, everybody in the county is going to be directly impacted with what county government does or does not do. If you've got children in school, we are supporting the school budget. If you need emergency medical services or you need the sheriff's office, these are areas that we fund. If you want to buy land, you have to deal with the register of deeds. We have an election, we have an elections board that we have to support. We have a veterans office to support the veterans. We've got social services in the health department that help many people in the county that would not have services or things that they could acquire otherwise. So yes, our impacts are far-reaching, and a lot of those impacts are straight up that there's not a lot that we can do other than provide the services, and those services we try to be very conscientious in providing.
I think the thing I think about is like when David looks at those line items and he sees there that there's maybe ways he can move money from one line item to another. Are there times that you have to do that? Have you had to do that this past year, David, where you've moved one particular line item budget over to something else to help shore up another department?
Yes, that's basically within the operational parts of the budget we have. We really stay away from the salary line items. We try to, like I say, turnover creates money we're going to save. We try to save that money, but if you're going from supplies to gas or vice versa, that money will move. You know, we generally don't do it for capital outlay. If you don't spend all your capital outlay money, you're replacing a piece of equipment, we generally will not move that somewhere else. But on the whole, like I said, the departments do a good job in maintaining what they get, what we give them in allocations or what the board allocates to them. They generally do a good job in keeping within those ranges.
We've heard a lot of discussion from the Department of Health and Human Services about Medicare and Medicaid. How does that impact local budgets, the whole Medicare and Medicaid agenda?
Give you one quick example, and one of the things we sometimes fail to think about is unintended consequences, and we don't second guess decisions that are made above us, but we do have to recognize the impacts. For example, I think recently the governor's decided that, or the state may have decided they're not going to expand the Medicaid services for about 500,000 people. Well, at the end of the day, those people still need the services, and so those same people that may not be eligible for Medicaid are still going to be coming to the hospital and coming to the county's health department, and so that does put pressure on the services and the funding that we provide to try to meet the basic needs of people that are just without help elsewhere, and so it does have an impact.
And David, back to you. When I think about the budget, or any budget, but particularly county budget, the biggest chunk of that budget, is it in equipment, salaries? Where is the biggest percentage of?
The largest percentage is really in salaries throughout any department. I think one of the ones I looked at recently was the health department. Their budget for salaries throughout the whole health department is around 67, 68% based on what they've the requested budget I looked at recently. I think it's even maybe a little higher in the sheriff's department. But you know, we are driven with people to provide the services. You know, we don't manufacture anything, so it's not in equipment or manufacturing equipment. It's in people to provide the services to the citizens.
Do you guys see a change futuristically? And I know we're talking about the 2012-2013 budget, the fiscal year we're in now, but as we think about future stuff, do you see a change in which technology may change that picture a little bit of the percentage of actual bodies doing things, moving it more to equipment and technology?
Yes, without question. That's an evolving process, and in addition, we're going to have the training for those people remaining to be able to move that way. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges the Department of Social Services is undergoing now is that they're doing a tremendous change to be more technology savvy, and quite frankly, at some point in the next year or 2 years, I would expect us to be able to have some reductions in staffing. When I say reductions, am I planning to send people home? No, but I think there will come a point in time where attrition will allow us to have some people retire possibly and not fill those vacancies. So yes, I think that's a very direct example of what we're likely to see.
And David, as you look at that, and I'm sure you're thinking probably different line items where things is at, and I'm sure your brain opposite from mine because you're looking at line items and numbers. When you look at those numbers and line items, do you see where that's going to be a plus in the sense of maintenance of that equipment and maintaining technological advantages? Because yes. I know there's expenses involved in that as well.
Yes, I mean, basically once you get past the startup expense of doing that, like the social service, for example, buying the scanners, mm-hmm. making sure the computers can use the software and use the equipment you've got to go with them, and the training is your biggest upfront investment. Mm-hmm. And later on you are able to, for instance, not hire a position where somebody retired and not adding to a position. We want to get where we can control our cost better and not be subject to the whims of prices going up for whatever reason. I mean, right now it's things like insurances or health insurance. You know, the price can go way up. You know, you really want to be able to control those costs and know what they're going to be so you can plan adequately versus saying, now I've got a 21% increase in something and I've got to find a way to fund it, or my retirement going up. If I know my employment might go down a little bit, or retirees might be going off that I don't have to replace, then I know better what my costs are going to be and I can plan better.
Well, and I think it's important you mentioned insurance, and that's one of the things I want us to kind of follow up on because that is a huge dynamic that's affecting everybody. But right now I want to take a break, And I want to come back and maybe follow up on that insurance concept, because you guys furnish insurance to quite a number of employees on the county payroll, and it's a huge impact. So we're going to take a short break here. We'll be back in a few minutes, but before we take a break, I want to remind folks that you are looking at WCLN. I also kind of remind you, just a quick reminder, that we appreciate all those folks that keep us in mind, like Boogie Shoes with Robert Stroud, Wayne Weeks with the Gospel Hour, and Don Smith with the Country Store. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Again, the name of the show is We Should Know. If you're listening to us on WCLN Radio, you may be riding down the road, you may be at home, Star Vision TV, Channel 16. You might want to call a friend. Here in Sampson County, we have something called taxes, and taxes will be due shortly. We're going to be talking about that in a little while, but we're talking with the folks that literally administer the budget here in Sampson County and the manager that manages the budget in Sampson County, Ed Causey, the county manager, and of course David Clack, who is the person in charge of, how should I put this, directing the flow and access to funds. Maybe your official title is Finance Officer, but see, I could give him a much longer title than that. Salary might not be any different, David, but it's interesting we talk about that. As we went to break, we had started a brief discussion about insurance. Insurance is something that's, we've had on this show the insurance commissioner and others to talk about the details and complexities of what's happening with insurance, the issues on the federal level. We're looking at a national insurance policy now, often referred to as kind of the Obama plan or what have you. County employees have insurance, and they have health benefits. How does that impact what you guys are doing and thinking about, not only today, but looking toward the future? What does insurance, how does that impact you and what you're looking at, either one of you, as relates to the budget?
Well, health insurance is, I would guess, probably our biggest single expenditure. The county is self-insured for health insurance, and up to $50,000 per employee. Then we purchase insurance for the balance, just like anybody else. And while it's allocated among all the departments, basically the total for the counties is $6+ million a year is what we pay out in claims and reinsurance cost. And you can see where a small increase in that expenditure would be a lot of money. Basically $380,000 or so is about what 1 cent brings in. So even a small increase in health insurance could eat most of that up. Now, do grants pay for some of it? The state, through Department of Social Services, pays for part. Health insurance kicks in, or not health insurance, but the health department through grants kicks in their part, and various other ones do too. But there's a lot that just comes straight out of county coffers that goes to basically cover the insurance for every one of our permanent employees.
And I'm sure most of our listeners, when they hear $6 million, I mean, that's huge to anybody. I think in our listening area, no matter how wealthy a person is, $6 million in insurance is a lot of money. So as we look at the National Health Care Plan, given what may or may not happen related to that, and what, if any, impacts may or may not happen on the state level, at some point in time it trickles down to the counties, right, Ed?
Yes, sir.
So when you look at that, would you say then that an employee that has health benefits, that's a definite fringe benefit to that employee, or would it not be?
Clearly, the heretofore we have had a package that represents and gives good benefits to our employees compared to other similar governmental entities. Moving forward, we are going to have to give considerable time to this whole package of looking at compensation for employees as well as benefits, and to make sure that we are providing something that is reasonable and fair and that can be afforded. One of the things I think that has gotten the federal government in trouble or challenging the budget is the unfunded liabilities of health care down the road. And as time goes forward, certainly if we're going to be good stewards of the resources here in Sampson County, we're going to have to look at that entire package in making sure that we are allowing our programs to evolve in the same manner that other programs are around the country. But at the same time, we want to emphasize that as we do that for benefits, we've also got to come back and look at the other side of the equation and make sure that the compensation package is being given due consideration as well.
So, and I think you make a very good point in the sense as we look at that package of what employee compensation is, it's the total package that oftentimes needs to be looked at, because in our friends in the private sector out there, and I guess I'm probably in that category now, when you look at it, a lot of private sector folks will look at you and say, hey, $600 to $1,000 a month is what often they look at as an insurance benefit. And if they don't have somebody paying that, it's got to come out of their pocket. So if you've got an employee and they're working and their benefits is somewhere in that range, that's a huge plus for them. That means that that's something they would not normally have to pay out of their pocket.
That is correct. That is a positive benefit. But again, we were talking at the break about all of the unknowns out there. Mm-hmm. We probably will be facing some of those unknowns, and we're going to have to be good stewards of the county's resources and try to anticipate and plan and make sure not only are we looking after the budget for the county, but we are protecting the interest of our important employees just as well.
David, as you think about what Ed just said and this anticipation idea, which you've always got to try to anticipate, do you have in the budget, I know I heard a term some time ago called the rainy day fund and all that kind of thing. Do you have funds there that you can leverage to for emergency situations? I know we have had a number of disasters here in the county and those kinds of things. Are there funds set aside specifically for that, or do you have to dip into those funds in today's world to be able to sustain the budget that we have?
Ever since I've been with the county, and most counties and cities, local governments operate the same way, each year we set aside funds for what we call contingency, unforeseen circumstances. For the longest time while I was here, it was about $200,000, but as budget started moving up and we took on all this extra debt service, we moved it up to $350,000. Now, from time to time, there'll be reasons why that a department will need money. Sometimes it's to match a grant that they were able to get that they didn't know they were going to get. So we can get for 10% of the cost, we can buy a certain piece of equipment, which is a good deal. So the commissioners will appropriate contingency for it. They might appropriate contingency if we had a roof that suddenly started leaking that insurance wouldn't cover, it was not an insurance issue, and things like that. So we appropriate that every year and build it in. So when we don't use it, that money, of course, returns back to the county's savings account, what we call fund balance. That essentially holds the bulk of our rainy day monies, which we're able to appropriate each year. If we don't spend it, we can certainly reappropriate it next year to help us balance the budget. So it's not part of the tax rate, you take if you have a $1.8 million appropriation of fund balance in current thing, that's almost 6 cents on the tax rate. Oh, so that's a 6 cent savings. Maybe you will use it, maybe you won't. So
those are just the issues that may or may not happen. Ed, I want to kind of go back to you and just let's kind of change the focus of our discussion a little bit and just talk about structure. County government and the structure of county government. As county manager, you have purview over all the departments in the county. Things come to you, they flow to you through other department heads and that kind of thing. But there's something called a Board of County Commissioners.
Yes, sir.
And I want to kind of discuss that in the sense of the budget and what that board, how that board fits, because oftentimes, and I guess I don't want to necessarily look at the commissioner and say, well, the commissioners contact the commissioner, because ultimately you have a decision-making part of that, but kind of explain to us how that works, and if a person does have a point or a comment or a question, is it the kind of thing they would need to call you or David, or maybe mention it to their commissioner, because most of the folks know their commissioners in their area?
Well, clearly we want to be accessible and hear what people are interested in. I will tell you in that line, it is more helpful for people to tell me how to improve something and give me specifics as opposed to just saying I want to drop the tax rate. Everybody would like to reduce the tax rate. That doesn't give us a lot of help, but the individual that will think through and says, here's where you can get your savings, would be something to consider. And quite frankly, we do get some of those calls, and we do try to give some consideration, and sometimes there may be some adjustment. Relative to the budget, quite frankly, for the county manager is an entire process for the year. As soon as we get one budget done, I can tell you a good bit of my time continues to be thinking about the next budget. I have been here since 2010, and every time we go through the process, we try to think about what the commissioners have said and try to be prepared to improve the process as much as we can last year. Keep in mind, I do not know of a county anywhere that gives the Board of Commissioners or the public as much information as we do about the budget. I think the total budget, David, is what, 600-700 pages?
Yes.
So there's a lot of information there for people to look at. Relative to the commissioners, we have a planning session in February where we may talk about major issues and try to get some guidance, or certainly put out there some of the things that are going to be coming up. For example, this year, one of the things that is back that we're having lots of discussion on is courthouse security, and that will be a subject that we'll be talking on. Last year, in our discussion, some of the commissioners said they wanted to be more involved earlier in the process because giving them a lot of information late was rather challenging. And keep in mind, these gentlemen generally have other jobs and things that they are doing, so their time can be limited. So this year we had our first pre-budget meeting, which we tried to not give them a budget, but outline for them some of the major issues that were coming, and try to let them look and give us some direction on how they wanted to proceed. So we have taken that direction, and we are in the process of trying to develop a budget right now that comes as close to meeting those objectives as we possibly can.
And one of the things you mentioned I think is important too, and again, it's one of those things when you say it just kind of allows me to discuss this further, is that media, and recently the local news media has reported different things in the paper about different parts of the budget and what's going on. But you have to react to that as county manager and finance officer when they print something. If it's a leading kind of discussion, and some of them are, although it's accurate, I'm sure, you have to react to that as county manager and finance officer.
Absolutely. Because if it's an article in the paper, trust me, I'm going to have some discussion with the commissioners who are very interested in, and generally what they will want to do is verify the accuracy of what is being reported first.
Absolutely.
And then sometimes that will offer some direction on how we're going to react thereafter.
And I would hasten to say, and I know both of you guys would too, we appreciate each and every one of those folks that are commissioners here in the county for dedicating their time and service, and it is becoming, I think, a more arduous thought process for folks to step up and say they're willing to do that, because it is a huge amount of time, their personal time, that they're dedicating to representing their district and representing the people in the county that they represent. So let's hasten to say, and I think I will get an affirmation from you guys that that's an important job. But as we look at that,
let me
go right ahead, please.
The Board of Commissioners, where we talk about, let me give them a plug.
Please.
These guys
they deserve one.
These guys during the month of April have had 3 meetings as the Board of Commissioners. Okay, just the Board of Commissioners. In addition, the Board of E&R has started the equalization and review, where we look at people that have challenges with their taxes. By the end of April, they will have met 4 times on that. So just during 1 month, these gentlemen who have other responsibilities and other needs in their lives have met 7 times, in addition to other trips to the office or conversations. For example, Commissioner Kirby and I were having a conversation. He came to the office first thing this morning and said that does not count the other things.
Well, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a moment. We're going to continue that discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching We Should Know. We're talking with the county manager, the finance officer for the county of Sampson. Stay with us. We'll be back in 1 moment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We have the good fortune today on We Should Know having with us the county manager, the finance officer, David Clack, county manager, Ed Causey. We're talking about county government. We're talking about budgets. We're talking about impacts of the budget. One of the things that we kind of were discussing as we left was the whole impact of media. Sometimes I think media, news media in particular, print something or something is put out or broadcast. It causes a reaction, as you indicated, in county government, and to some degree it causes you to review things and how you're doing things. And one of the things that was recently printed was dealing with employee financial compensation. So since that's kind of open game now, and I know you want to kind of maybe speak to that, let's talk about that segment for a minute and the county compensation issue, where we stand, and those kinds of things. Let me preface this for everyone out there, all of our listeners, because I know if I don't, I'm going to get calls or I'm going to get emails. Trust me, I get a lot of calls and emails. everyone knows that we are in a huge crunch now. Personal budgets, folks without jobs, folks looking jobs, and it is important to to be thankful we have a job. At the same time, folks want to feel like that they're increasing a bit in their income to be able to sustain some sense of I guess equity or equality in their financial relationships with what they've got to pay. David, you mentioned a while ago the cost of things kind of going up, gas and everything else. But at the same time, you've got to manage that to make sure that it fits within a budget. And one of the things that folks are totally against, apparently, or at least if you look at some of the polls, is continued expansion of government. Folks will just simply look at you and go, we don't need any more government. So talk to us about how you guys look at that and balance that, and how it works with you working with the Board of Commissioners to keep that in check. At the same time, you've got employees on the other side of you that's department heads and others, according to the news article. Now, we won't read that, but I mean, basically, you got some department heads saying, I'm losing employees because we're not paying them another $1,000, $2,000 a year. It's got to be tough, because I'm sure you would like to do that. So let's talk about that for a minute.
It may take longer than a minute.
Well, we'll take 3 minutes then.
But we'll give it a stab.
Go right ahead.
When we get into employee compensation, this is a wide range. But let's first start from the standpoint of the resident of Sampson County. If the resident of Sampson County needs a service, okay, when I think about a service, it may be a specialist at social services, or it may be a deputy sheriff, or it may be an emergency management personnel from emergency management. You're talking about when you need that service, you want people that are highly trained, skilled, and experienced. So at the end of the day, we're not talking about just giving people anything. We're talking about trying to be able to maintain the service level that the public desires. At the same time I tell you this, I will then tell you that the last time we had a pay study was 2003, and it was not fully implemented. And as time progressive, we are cataloging some very distinct differences. For example, it has been printed in the paper the number of people that have left the health department because of low wages. We've got a great deal of data on what has happened at the sheriff's department. We lost an IT person because he just could not afford to continue working. And when we stop thinking about this, we need to put it into concept. Living in Sampson County is a privilege. But at the same time, would we expect a family to give up some retirement income to live in the county? Would we expect a farmer to give up income just for the privilege of farming in Sampson County? Would we expect a business to give up some income? So if we're talking about fair compensation, would we expect anybody to work with Sampson County that we are not trying to come up with a fair compensation package for? And that is the issue. The data clearly shows that the wages in surrounding counties are being paid significantly higher in some areas, and that at some point in time that we're going to have to do some kind of evaluation to try to make sure that we adjust it. Give you an example. I talked to a person that was working in the Department of Social Services the other day, told me that the only reason that they stayed here was because it was convenient. This was their home, and they wanted to be able to carry their child to school every day. But they could go to an adjoining county and start at $8,000 more than what they were paying. I recently saw the sheriff went to Dunn and somehow saw that he had 5 former sheriff's deputies that were living in Sampson County that were working out of the county for higher wages. At the end of the day, this is something that we have got to consider, and that we need to look at this, and as we look toward the future, make sure that we have a compensation fair. We're not talking about giving people great sums of money. We're talking about trying to be responsible and reasonable and come up with an equitable way to pay the people that work for Sampson County along with the benefits, and also be planning for some future. And when we start doing that kind of planning, that planning is probably going to consider trying to minimize over time the number of new positions that have been hired. And when we stop and think about it, it is not just giving people increased salaries. It is trying to make sure that we're compensating people well in order to maintain that skill level for the services that we want to reach. If I have somebody breaking in my home, I would like to know that I've got an experienced deputy coming out there to respond to that. If I'm going to have a sickness where I need the rescue squad, I think think it is comforting to me to know that when that vehicle pulls up in my yard, I'm getting the same level of service that anybody else in these United States is probably getting, with the exception of time of receipt. So those are the things that we have got to look at, and we're getting to the point that it is becoming critical in one area. For example, we have lost some key people in the health department that may in fact affect the income of the department, in that they are revenue producers. And so as time goes on, some of these challenges are going to become very critical, and it's something we need to look at in a responsible manner.
David, when we talk about employees and we talk about folks leaving, one of the things that comes to mind is objective interviews when they leave. You know, oftentimes organizations, and I know government has done this, when somebody leaves, they'll sit down and they'll do an objective-based interview. Why are you leaving this job? Do you guys do that? I mean, do you have a central department that handles that, or is that something that's handled by the department heads?
Basically, for the most part, by the department heads. Of course, you know, they're welcome to come over and talk to us about it, but more often than not, the department head will take that on to do that for themselves, to find out what's going on. I think it's come down to more in the last 10 years or so that the service that the county's been providing, like if you take the rescue and paramedics, we've gone from volunteers to emergency medical technicians, and now we're at a paramedic level of service. Those people require a lot of training. You know, even the volunteers that we still have that do rescue, that do a great job, have to invest a lot in training, as well as our fire departments. You know, it's not a matter of I can volunteer and run down there and jump on the truck and do whatever. You know, it's not a matter of just driving somewhere like it was almost was at one time. The issue with training the new employees, the turnover, is sooner rather than later going to have a larger effect on the county's finances. To train these nurses that the health department has to have, they just can't take a nurse out of school and be able to bill Medicaid for their services. Chances are somebody's training that person, so you've got two people working and drawing the same dollar down, essentially. When if you got a trained person in there, you got two people, they're serving two different people, they're making the money to fund most of their position. I think that's what we're going to face in a lot of areas. I think that's what we are facing, our deputies. Constantly there's more training to be done for deputies. Even line personnel for the county that don't have specialized job, office personnel, we're going to have to start training them more, through safety concerns, workers' compensation insurance, things like that are requiring more of our employees' time and more expertise and more cost to the county. Ultimately, there'll be a savings, but we still have to make the upfront investment. It's like technology. You've got to put the money in first to reap benefits later.
A number of nationally recognized organizations that do these kinds of surveys on employability and folks leaving jobs, one of them particularly speaks to there's 5 particular reasons folks leave a job, and one of them says that the 5th and last thing is normally finances. The others deal with everything from self-esteem to appreciation for the job they're doing, the area they work in, job close to home, all of those kinds of things. And they say although salary is critically important, it's not the first and foremost thing for employability for an individual. So I guess that's one of the reasons on exit interviews and talking to employees of why they leave. There may be a combination of things that cause that, to include salary. Would you think that would be correct?
There would be a combination.
Because it's never just one little...
Most of the time, but I can tell you increasingly over the last several years with our employees, there's an increasing number of employees that will tell you that their primary reason, I'm not talking about, there are those people that just decide they're going to resign, but there are a number of employees that are changing jobs, and the primary reason is for increased compensation.
You know, I think as we move forward, depending on what happens with government, as we see this national trend of the need for smaller government, the word sequestration brought all that to the news media lately, but it's basically just cutting back on government. It's really a challenge on your guys, when you look at it from where you guys sit, to try to maintain that level of service. So how do you determine what level of service the folks in the county are demanding, and does the average person out there that maybe be listening to this show, we will ask them maybe this question, they can think about it, do they ever sit down and say, well, what level of service do I really demand? Do you think they understand that, or do we tell them what they should expect?
Well, I think at this point in time, typically my example would be if you call the deputy, does he come? Or if you call the EMS, do they come? Mm-hmm. Typically, I think the county has done a remarkable job of maintaining a pretty high level of service. Mm-hmm. But as time goes on, and when we get into this budget, depending on what happens over the next several years, we're going to come to the point, and I can pretty well assure you this is going to happen, that we're going to have to start giving some thought to the kinds of services and amount of services we want to provide versus what we can willing to pay. The county doesn't have a world of resources to come up with. It either comes in the form of sales tax or property tax or a few grants here and there, and maybe some revenues. But so we don't have a world of avenues to get resources, and so there's probably going to be some significant dialogue on the level of services that we're going to be providing. And from my standpoint as a manager, I can make recommendations all day, but it comes down to what do the citizens want VA communicating with their commissioners.
On that thought, we'll be back in a moment with We Should Know. Stay with us. We'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking with Ed Causey, David Clack's financial manager. Ed Causey is the county manager of the County of Sampson. Guys, we talked about a lot of stuff today. This is kind of our last segment coming up here, and I want to try to squeeze some things in. And one of the things I want to, it's kind of a little conversation here about, and I'm going to put a time limit on it, but dealing with the whole discussion about proposed changes in the tax system for North Carolina. The legislature of North Carolina is doing some very interesting things in Raleigh now, and I find it interesting because every day it gives me new fuel from my show, so to speak. But there's a lot of things happening. Let's talk about what's happening there and what that may mean and what impact it may have or effect on Sampson County.
JW, if you remember in the last year or two when we've been talking, we've talked to you about the importance of doing planning for the future, which is something we've tried to emphasize. I won't grade us on how successful we've been, but certainly we're making the effort. Right. When we get into, or if we talk to our legislators, what we find is there's a lot of interest in changing the tax structure, and more than likely, and there is some data to support it, and we're not judging what is happening, we're just trying to think of the consequences for Sampson County. Mm-hmm. If, in fact, we go to a system where the tax structure is going to be based on consumption type taxes as opposed to personal income taxes, there is probably going to be some indirect results that a lot of the taxing structure is going to go to the high population area when you get into sales tax. Don't know that to be the case, but certainly as the structure changes, we in Sampson County need to be thinking very carefully about what the future is going to allow for us relative to a variety of sources of revenue, sales tax. And I'm inclined to believe that probably there's increasing evidence that we probably ought to consider becoming even more proactive in developing our economy, in trying to prepare ourselves to not only take care of business in the next 20 years, but also be as receptive to being able to capture as many state and federal dollars as possible.
I think it's a good point when you look at it. And one of the things, David, that comes to mind when we talk about this consumption tax, sales tax, or whatever term you want to put on it, looking at it from a mathematical point of view, is a consumption tax more fair and equitable than what we have now, which is an ad valorem or property tax?
Well, it certainly allows you to collect those dollars on what people are purchasing versus what they own. We do have a certain amount of the population that really may have a car at the most. If it's listed in Sampson County, then we're getting a little property tax. But if they're living in rental houses and things like that, they're certainly not paying property taxes, but they are going to the grocery store in Sampson County. They are buying things in Sampson County that we would get a tax for. We reap over almost $6.5 million, I guess, in the sales taxes that we get. The 2.25 cents that is allocated for Sampson County for those purchases. Some of those taxes are allocated a little different. Some of them are allocated per capita versus being allocated directly on the sales here. Mm-hmm. But we do get a lot of money. I mean, I couldn't say which one's the most fair either way, but it's certainly a balance in between the way you tax, the way you collect your revenues.
And I almost feel like I need to apologize to David, because I think that's a question that's being wrestled with on the federal level now. When we look at tax on the federal level, we're looking at that 3 to 5% of the wealthiest folks, they ought to pay more taxes. And then you think about folks in Sampson County, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but the bulk of it is being paid by people that own something or have something. So these are folks that have worked hard, they've accumulated whatever it may be, farms, tractors, livestock operations, and they're paying a huge chunk of the ad valorem of property taxes, whereas you just mentioned the folks that may not even have a car registered here and renting a house may be paying little or nothing in property taxes. So if we look at taxation and we look at what's happening in Raleigh, Mr. County Manager, do you feel like we need to make an aggressive move to kind of even this playing field a little bit, where it may be 1 or 2 cents on the dollar as opposed to this huge amount?
I would tell you to think about this. Simply, I'm not going to judge which is. That is not my role, and that creates a can of worms I don't want to get into.
It's tough at times, though, I can tell you.
But at the same time, if there is going to be an increased emphasis on consumption taxes, which ultimately means sales taxes, would it not behoove us in Sampson County to increase our thought process regarding what we want to do to encourage as much sales tax expenditure in Sampson County, whether it be by helping people create businesses with incomes or whatever it might be. So that is the whole point of discussion. And where we have talked about economic development in the past, what I'm seeing is I think the discussions tell me that probably these kinds of discussions are going to be even more important in the future than they have been in the past. What we would like to do is engage the public, get the public to think about what they want and express themselves, because I will tell you this, we do have 5 commissioners that are very responsive to their constituents and what they hear. So if they don't think their commissioners listening are listening to them, I will tell you that they're wrong. So they do have their avenues to be able to inflect what they want to see in county government.
And I think one of the pluses we have, and I would say, oftentimes we'll see in the paper where the commissioners have disagreed on whatever subject or whatever, but that almost is a positive, because you don't have a board that just sits and gives you a bobbing head. They're really doing research, looking at this stuff, and making what they feel is the best decision for their constituency.
That is
and I think that's a huge plus. I hope folks, when they see that, don't think, well, this is just a disgruntled group of people. They're really working hard because they think there's a better way to do this, or we need to rethink this, and I think it's a huge plus. So having said that, as we move forward with this discussion about taxation, you mentioned a while ago the E&R, the evaluation review process. That's part of looking at additional funds as well. I mean, when you look at the root of what that process is, it's about what you got and how are we going to evaluate it, because obviously if it goes up in value, you're going to pay more taxes on it.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that part of what that is and why folks should know more about and be proactive on that process, either one of you.
The Board of Equalization and Review is set up by statute, and is something that every county has to do. Typically, you have your greatest discussion. You have to periodically do a revaluation of your tax base. Here again, it's required by statute. You have to do it once at least every 8 years, and you can do more frequently. Some counties do it more frequently, and there's some reason to suggest that's something that you may want to consider at a point in time. That being said, each county is required to set up a Board of Equalization and Review, and once that process is established, taxpayers that get their tax bills in are given the opportunity after January to meet with the Board of E&R and talk about them and give data to indicate whether those tax bills are correct. And in Sampson County, here again, let me share, our commissioners, rather than appointing a Board of Equalization and Review, have decided that since they ultimately set the tax rate, they should sit as the Board of E&R, and if a taxpayer's got some concerns, they will allow that taxpayer to come in and sit before them and tell them what they think is wrong with the taxes, and with the tax rate or the taxes being charged, and then they will give it due consideration. And that is the process that we're going through as we speak.
And one may look at that and say they're throwing their own selves into the fire, I guess, when they're doing that, because that's a huge job within itself.
Yes.
That is quite a task.
Yeah. 2 other things I want to touch on before we run out of time and this is terminology issues. I want to make sure, one of them is terminology issue, to make sure folks understand. David, tell us what revenue neutral taxation or budget is. We've heard that term, revenue neutral. Explain to the folks what that is.
Every 8 years when they revalue all the property in the county, General statutes require that you present a tax rate. An equivalent tax rate is what it would have been if you hadn't revalued all the property. It was basically put into place because at the time you had the tax bases going up in counties that did it every 8 years in excess of 20, 25, or 30%, and then in your beach counties, a lot more. Mm-hmm. So they wanted the board to be responsible and the county to be responsible to the taxpayers to tell them, well, I understand your property went up and this is what the equivalent rate would have been if we had not done revaluation. Right. Because you expect a little growth every year in your tax base, 1.5%, 2%, whatever it is. And so you go through and you average your 8 years of what your 8 years average growth would be. You apply that to this year and you come up with what would be the equivalent tax rate. You know, everybody generally always drops their tax rate in revaluation because property's gone up so much. So that's basically what it is, and you're required to put it in your budget ordinance when you do revaluation, whether it's every 4 years or 8 years.
Ed, another question to you. I know last year we had this discussion about budget, and the budget, because of the voluminous document it was, you had the budget posted on the website. Will we be able to look at the budget this year on the website? Sir. So, and I think one of the things I would say to you, you've always been forthcoming on that and the importance of folks seeing what the budget is. I mean, they could actually go on there, and I've encouraged people. I said, go on there. In fact, you encourage people to go on there, look at that budget, and if you have concerns or questions, contact you. With that said, I want to give you a quick kind of closure because we've come to the end now, just closing comments, and then give David a couple of seconds to do that. So give us your closing summation.
I would say in summation, we're heading into the budget time, and I will be the first one to admit for myself this is probably the most challenging time of year. At the same time, it can be one of the most interesting times of year. And it is a time where lots of issues are going to be dealt with, and yes, we have some challenges. And it's going to be a time where our Board of Commissioners is going to have the opportunity to make some decisions on not only what we're going to do this year, but how it's going to impact subsequent years. In those decisions, we will try to incorporate and provide for the public as best we can. People often say they just don't have an opportunity to impact government. I would say people that have given some good thoughts to concerns that they have. I suspect that people that can articulate well-thought ideas may find that there's more reception to what they have to say than what they might think. And I'd encourage them to talk to the county staff or their commissioners or come to the public hearing that we have.
Sounds good. David?
I just remind everybody, too, that the information we had in the pre-budget work session is still available on our website for anybody to look at. It included what we thought we might have for this year, challenges we might face, where we might have extra money or less money, and all the information that the departments sent us. And all that was given to the board just like the recommended budget. That'll all be out there.
I want to thank both of you gentlemen for being here. Fair and balanced, open and transparent. David Clack, Ed Causey, County Manager. Thank you for watching today. We'll see you again next week on the radio.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question or comment regarding this or any episode, please send your email questions and or comments to jwsimmonsedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday afternoon beginning at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.